In July of 1884, a long-standing feud between two men would erupt in gunfire on Front Street in Dodge City. This feud was not between Texas cowboys or outlaws, but between the assistant marshal of Dodge City and the deputy sheriff of Ford County. Despite their positions as peace officers, both sorely wanted the other to be dead, and after two shootings only a few days apart from each other, one would succeed while the other would die with their boots on. Thomas Clayton Nixon was one of the first settlers in Dodge City. In fact, he was there even before Dodge City got started. The first structure in the area was Henry Sittler's sod house, and Tom Nixon, working as a buffalo hunter, would join his fellow hunters in hauling their buffalo hides to Sittler's sod house. Tom settled close by with his wife and children, a quarter-mile west of what would become Dodge City. Nixon was one of the most successful and well-known buffalo hunters in the area. It is said that Nixon killed 2,173 buffalo in 35 days. He knew the Masterson brothers quite well, having worked with them in the buffalo hide business. Nixon figures prominently in the diary of Henry Raymond, a buffalo hunter who arrived in Dodge City in 1872. Besides the hide business, Nixon ran a blacksmith and repair shop for the fast-growing population of the new town. As the rail lines were laid through Dodge City, Nixon sold shelled corn for the horses used by the railroad. After the buffalo herds were gone, Nixon worked as a freighter and did some farm work. All the founding members of Dodge City respected Tom Nixon and knew him as a tough frontiersman with a kind heart. Once, in 1878, Nixon was falsely accused of robbing a Union Pacific train and was arrested. The newspaper noted, "We think there must be some error in the information which led to his arrest. Many of his old friends declare that Tom isn't that kind of a man." This turned out to be a mistake, as the name Tom Nixon was in fact an alias used by a noted border ruffian named Henry Underwood. In 1881, Nixon was appointed as assistant marshal under City Marshal Fred Singer. Nixon would also hold this position in 1882, and again in 1884. Besides being an officer of the law, Nixon was also co-owner of a dance hall. But before we go into that, let's introduce the man who was Tom Nixon's greatest enemy. David Allen Mather was born on August the 10th, 1851 in Saybrook, Connecticut. Mather lost both his parents by the age of 16. His father, Ulysses, a sea captain, had been stabbed to death in Shanghai. Following his father's footsteps, young Dave and his brother Josiah joined a crew on a ship. But after reaching New Orleans, both decided that that was not the kind of life they wanted. All his life, David Mather was under the impression that he was a descendant of Cotton Mather and Increase Mather, famous Puritans involved with the Salem witch trials in the late 17th century. This has since been learned to be incorrect, but the supposed family connection was often used in descriptions or discussions of David Mather. In his lifetime, David Mather was known throughout the West as Mysterious Dave. Why the name of Mysterious Dave? In 1888, a Westerner acquainted with Dodge City told a Chicago Times reporter, called him Mysterious Dave, 'cause nobody knew nothing about him. In his book, Dodge City, the Cowboy Capital, Robert Wright gave a list of characters in Dodge City, with a brief description of them. For Dave Mather, he wrote, Mysterious Dave, who stealthily employed his time. In small frontier towns, people like to talk and tell stories, sometimes for news and sometimes for entertainment. Dave Mather was known to speak very little. This, coupled with an unknown past and secretive behavior, helped create an air of mystery around him. Even with such a name as Mysterious Dave, Mather was closely acquainted with many people on both sides of the law. Mather knew the West's most famous horse thief, Dutch Henry, and the notorious Dave Rudabaugh. But he was also friends with Bat Masterson and Charles Bassett, a longtime peace officer of Dodge City. Mather himself was also frequently on both sides of the law. Mysterious Dave first rose to prominence in Las Vegas, New Mexico. In 1879, he was wrongly accused of attempting to rob a train, but as there was no actual evidence against him, the charges were dropped. By November of 1879, Mather was serving as a constable in Las Vegas. On November the 20th, Mather would fire 5 or 6 times at a soldier trying to escape arrest. The soldier was found to be wounded in the thumb and taken to the jail. The newspaper chastised Mather for his shooting, saying that the soldier's drunk and disorderly conduct did not warrant a peace officer to open fire on them, and that Mather endangered the lives of those in the area by doing so. Soon Mather would have more on his plate than just drunk soldiers causing a ruckus. On January the 22nd, 1880, Mather would accompany City Marshal Joe Carson to the Variety Hall. A group of armed cowboys were drunk and causing a disturbance there. Joe Carson requested that the cowboys leave their guns with the bartender. They refused, and a gunfight soon erupted. It was said that 40 shots were fired within a minute. The first shot hit Carson in the right arm, which disabled him for the rest of the fight. To add to the confusion, during the shooting the lights went out. It was Dave Mather who faced off against the 4 cowboys. Mather stood his ground and did good work, making every shot count, and never got a scratch. Mather mortally wounded Bill Randall, greatly wounded Jim West in the side, and also wounded Tom Henry. The latter was able to escape the scene with the 4th cowboy, John Dorsey. When the smoke settled, Marshal Joe Carson was dead, having been shot 8 times. Bill Randall was shot through the breast and would die the next morning. Jim West was too injured to escape. Tom Henry and John Dorsey had escaped, but not for long. They would eventually be captured and lodged in jail. Carson was well liked, and vengeance was on everyone's mind. An angry mob broke Henry, Dorsey, and West out of jail and led them to the old windmill on the plaza to be hanged. West was hanged, but the mob decided to shoot the other 2. This would not be the last gunfight Mysterious Dave would be involved in Las Vegas. A few days after the Variety Hall fight, on January the 25th, Joseph Castello, a telegraph operator, made the mistake of pointing a gun at Dave Mather, threatening to shoot him if he made another step. The Las Vegas Daily Optic described Mysterious Dave's response. In the twinkling of an eye, almost before the breathless bystanders had time to see a movement on his part, he drew his trusty revolver from its place and fired 1 shot at the determined man, the ball taking effect in Castello's left side below the ribs, penetrating the lung and ranging downward, passing through the stomach and liver. Castello would die hours later at the doctor's office. Mather would leave his position as constable in Las Vegas and briefly go look for gold in Gunnison, Colorado, with friend Charles Bassett. Afterwards, he would make his way down into Texas, where he was arrested for theft at the beginning of 1882. Dave was charged with stealing a gold chain and ring from Georgia Morgan, a woman he was intimate with, who was also the proprietress of the Long Branch House, a famous dance house and brothel in East Dallas. After Texas, Mysterious Dave decided the next chapter of his life would be to the north, in Dodge City, Kansas. To understand the long-standing feud between Tom Nixon and Mysterious Dave Mather, we need to understand what Dodge City was like in 1884. The good old days of cattle drives, saloons, dance halls, gambling, and prostitution were coming to a close. 1885 would be the last year of the cattle drives. But in 1884, you could see the rise of the Prohibition and anti-saloon movement. Tom Nixon had the home advantage. He had been in the area even before Dodge City began. He knew everyone and had been making money in all sorts of enterprises, including being the assistant marshal in 1881 and 1882. Mysterious Dave came to Dodge City to make money, to continue his profession in law enforcement, and open a business to capitalize on the Texas cowboys. Nixon was aware that Dodge City was changing from a wild frontier town to a more respectable city. Mysterious Dave would have to learn this lesson the hard way. In 1881, Tom Nixon had partnered with an old buffalo hunter friend, Orlando A. Bond, in purchasing the Lady Gay Dance Hall on the south side of Dodge. They renamed it as Bond and Nixon's Old Stand, continuing its operation as a saloon and dance hall. Dance halls were very popular in frontier communities. They were places of drinking and musical entertainment, but more importantly, they were places where women could be found to dance with. Men could pay a small amount to dance with a lady for a short time, all the while drinking at the bar and netting the dance hall owner a good profit. There was a link between dance hall girls and prostitution. Not all dance hall girls were prostitutes, but in small frontier towns with low populations of women, there was considerable overlap. The women who worked in the dance halls who were not prostitutes were still looked down upon in polite Victorian society, and so it's not surprising that dance halls were the first to go in Dodge City. The person to begin the movement against the dance halls was Dr. Samuel Galland, a prohibitionist who owned and operated the Great Western Hotel. On March the 22nd, 1884, Samuel Galland and his attorney procured a temporary injunction restraining Bond and Nixon from operating their dance hall. What was the reason that Galland gave in trying to close down Nixon's dance hall? Well, the Great Western Hotel was very near Nixon's dance hall, and Galland alleges that his business of hotel keeping had been injured, and that his family had been denied social society privileges in consequence of proximity of the dance hall to his place of business. The petition by Galland was published in the Dodge City Times under the title, "The Dance Hall Must Go." Further down the petition, it states that said defendants furnish rooms in their said building to many of said lewd women, knowingly for the purpose of plying their vocation of prostitution, and said rooms were so used by said lewd women to the knowledge of the defendants. Tom Nixon and his partner decided the best way to settle with Dr. Galland was selling their dance hall to him for $2,500. And the sale was listed in the April 12th edition of the Dodge City Democrat. $2,500 in 1884 would be around $71,000 today, so Nixon was able to end his business with keeping a nice tidy sum at the end. In the meantime, Mysterious Dave Mather had been working as a peace officer in Dodge City. He had been appointed assistant marshal in June of 1883, serving under city marshal Jack Bridges, and also served as deputy sheriff under Patrick Shagrew. At the beginning of 1884, Mysterious Dave tried to run for constable of Dodge Township under the Democratic ticket, but eventually lost. More bad news came to Mysterious Dave with the Dodge City election of April 1884. George Hoover was elected the mayor, and with him came changes to the peace officers of Dodge City. Bill Tillman replaced Jack Bridges as city marshal, and Mysterious Dave lost his job as assistant marshal to Tom Nixon. However, Dave still retained his position as deputy sheriff under Shagrew. Nixon had taken his job. What was Mysterious Dave's next move in Dodge City? Well, there seemed to be a shortage of dance halls now that Nixon had sold his. Nixon and Bond had made good money over the years operating a dance hall, so why shouldn't Dave Mather? Mysterious Dave partnered with a friend he knew in Texas, David Black. Their choice of location was far away from any threat Dr. Samuel Galland might pose. It was north of the tracks, at the corner of First Avenue and Front Streets, the building known as the Opera House. They planned to open a dance hall on the second floor of the building and rake in the cash. But opening a dance hall was no easy task. You had to have liquor, a bartender, musical entertainment, and of course enough women to draw in a crowd. This takes time and considerable investment. In May of 1884, Mysterious Dave was ready to open his dance hall and hopefully start getting the business that had previously belonged to Tom Nixon. As soon as it was known that a new dance hall was about to be started, a special city council was formed by Mayor Hoover. Ordinance number 83 would be passed by the council. prohibiting any and all dance halls in Dodge City. There were 6 sections to this ordinance. Number 1, it was illegal for anyone to maintain a dance hall in the city or any other place where lewd women and men congregate for the purpose of dancing or otherwise. Number 2, it was illegal for anybody to visit any such establishment. Number 3, music was more or less outlawed in saloons and businesses. Number 4, any violations of the ordinance would result in a fine. Number 5, any ordinance in conflict with this one are repealed. And number 6, the ordinance would start with a publication in the Dodge City Democrat newspaper. There were many people that could be blamed for the closing of all the dance halls in Dodge City. The new mayor, Hoover, the city council members, or even Dr. Samuel Galland, whose protests had closed Nixon's dance hall. But Mysterious Dave blamed above all others his rival, Tom Nixon. Dave thought Nixon's influence to be the real reason why the city council had responded the way they did. Why would Mather think Nixon was to blame? It's unclear. Maybe Nixon's position was that if he couldn't have a dance hall, then nobody should have a dance hall. Or maybe Nixon just hated Mather so much he wanted to put him out of business. A lot of mystery surrounds the feud between Nixon and Mather. We don't know what conversations were had between the two, or what other factors are involved. 2 things are clear in their hatred for each other. Nixon took Mather's job as assistant marshal, and Mather blamed Nixon for not being able to open a dance hall. There may be a third reason. Robert Wright, in his book, describes another possible motivation in their feud. And, as usual, to use the French proverb for the cause, search the woman. The French phrase, cherchez la femme, translated as look for or seek the woman, is used when a man behaves unusually or gets into a quarrel or other difficulty, and the reason for it is sought. Even though Tom Nixon was married, he had operated a dance hall for 3 years, and was around a lot of loose women. It has already been established that Mysterious Dave was involved with at least one prostitute. Was there a woman in Dodge City that helped create this feud? Maybe, but so far Robert Wright was the only one to bring that up. What was Mysterious Dave's response to Ordinance number 83? Turn his dance hall into just a saloon and sell really, really cheap beer. Nelson Carey, the previous owner of the Opera House Saloon, had started undercutting his competitors by selling beer for 5 cents a glass, whereas everywhere else had sold beer at 2 glasses for 25 cents. Mysterious Dave continued this policy, but really advertised it. In the Dodge City Democrat newspaper, the May 31st edition, the page containing the ordinance that outlawed dance halls was absolutely peppered with the short ad of beer only 5 cents a glass at Opera House Saloon upstairs. 11 times on that one page, Mysterious Dave advertised his saloon and cheap beer. In fact, one of the advertisements was immediately above the section on Ordinance number 83. If the good people of Dodge City wouldn't allow Dave Mather to run a dance hall, then he was going to beat everyone else on having the cheapest drinks. The editor of the Dodge City Times thought that by lowering the prices of alcohol, profits in Dodge saloons would diminish, causing less people to want to be in the saloon business, and thus aiding prohibition. But I don't think at that time Mysterious Dave really cared. The tension between the veteran buffalo hunter and the mysterious gunfighter would finally come to a head on July 18th, 1884. From the Dodge City Democrat, Dodge City, Kansas, July 19th, 1884. Another shooting. About 9 o'clock last night, the city was thrown in considerable excitement by the report that Deputy Marshal Thomas Nixon had shot ex-Marshal Dave Mather. Investigation showed that Nixon had fired 1 shot from his 6-shooter at Mather from the foot of the Opera House stairs. Mather, at the time, standing at the head of the stairs. The bullet went wild and struck in the woodwork of the porch. Mather's face was considerably powder-burned, and the little finger of his left hand was injured by a splinter. The shooting was the result of an old feud, and as both men tell different stories about the shooting, and there were no witnesses, it is impossible to state who provoked the quarrel. Sheriff Shagru promptly disarmed Nixon, and he was taken to jail. Mather claims to have been unarmed, while Nixon claims Dave reached for his gun before he attempted to draw his own. Mather says he will make no complaint, but from all appearances, the end is not yet. Nixon gave bonds before Judge Cook in the sum of $800 for his appearance at the next term of court. The charge is assault with intent to kill. More would later become known in the papers about this incident. The Kansas Cowboy of July 26 described what had happened directly before the shooting. Nixon was looking through the window of the Opera House, in which a performance was being conducted, when he was observed by Mather, who was inside. Mather invited Nixon to come inside. Nixon declined and beat a retreat downstairs, followed by Mather, who applied to Nixon vile epithets. Nixon turned and fired a shot at Mather. The ball lodged in the side of the building and cut out a splinter which struck one of Mather's fingers, inflicting a slight wound. Nixon was arrested and tried for this shooting on Monday, but was acquitted. Immediately after Nixon had shot at Mather, he believed that he had killed him and made the remark that he had no regrets about doing so. It appears that Mather was unarmed at the time, despite what Nixon said. The Dodge City Democrat was prophetic when it had said, "But from all appearances, the end is not yet." It would not be long before there was another confrontation between the two. Just 3 days after Nixon had shot at Mather, Mysterious Dave would get his revenge. From the Globe Livestock Journal, Dodge City, Kansas, July 22nd, 1884. The murder. Assistant Marshal Thomas Nixon killed by Dave Mathers. At about 10 o'clock last evening, while Assistant Marshal Thomas Nixon was on duty at the corner of Front Street and First Avenue, Mysterious Dave Mathers, who keeps a saloon in the Opera House, came downstairs and deliberately shot him through. The facts, as near as we could learn, are as follows. Mathers came down the stairs from his saloon, and on his arrival at the foot, he called to Nixon, who was standing at the corner, and as Nixon turned around, Mather commenced shooting at him, firing 4 shots, 2 of them striking him in the right side, 1 in the left side, and 1 passed through the left nipple, killing him instantly. Mather was immediately disarmed and lodged in jail. A cowboy, whose name we could not learn, was hit in the leg and severely wounded by a ball that had passed through Nixon's body. Thomas Nixon was one of the oldest citizens of our city, coming here years ago to hunt the buffalo. He was made assistant marshal at the election last spring, and has been an officer in our city off and on for several years, being once city marshal. He was well liked by all who knew him, and a vast number of friends will miss Tom from his accustomed beat on Front Street. He leaves a wife and 2 children to mourn the loss of a loving husband and kind father. Of Dave Mather we have but little to say. He is known at Las Vegas, and wherever he has been is a dangerous man to have a quarrel with. He was once assistant marshal in this city, up to last spring, when Tom Nixon took his place. While constable at Las Vegas, he killed several men, and killed his man while in a quarrel at Mobeetie some time ago. After he had killed Nixon, he said, "I ought to have killed him 6 months ago." And as they had not been on good terms for a long time, it is supposed that it was the result of an old feud. On July 26, the Kansas Cowboy gave a description of the animosity between the two. A feud of several months' standing existed between the parties, growing out of the closing up of the dance hall in the Opera House, which was operated by Mather and Black. Mather suspected Nixon of being the cause of the breaking up of the dancing business. Mysterious Dave would be arrested by the sheriff of Ford County and his boss, Patrick Shagru. Archie Franklin was the cowboy who was wounded by one of Dave's shots at Nixon. He was shot near the knee joint, which would cause him great pain in the weeks that followed. Mysterious Dave would be tried for murder. Originally, he was tried in Dodge City, but eventually there would be a change of venue to nearby Edwards County, at Kinsley. Multiple witnesses were called during the trial. We learned from Dr. Milton, the physician who examined Tom Nixon's body, that all 4 shots fired by Mather had hit Nixon, 3 of the bullets having passed completely through. It was one of these that had wounded Archie Franklin. Although Nixon was armed at the time of the shooting, Fred Boyd, H.V. Cook, and Archie Franklin all testified that Nixon neither drew nor attempted to draw any weapons. Bat Masterson had also been a witness to the shooting. He was one of the first to examine Nixon after he was killed and testified, "He had his revolver on him. He was lying on it. It was partially drawn out. He had no other weapons that I saw." Archie Franklin said that Mather told Nixon that he was going to kill him right before he began shooting. Franklin wasn't completely sure what the words were, but he thought Mysterious Dave had said, "You have lived long enough." Mather would be released on bail near the end of August. In October, it was decided that a change of venue be made to Edwards County, and Dave would be tried there in December. On December 30th, the jury would reach a decision after only half an hour. The verdict was not guilty. Mysterious Dave had been acquitted. The reason for the jury's conclusion was published in the Dodge City Times. The verdict was undoubtedly a proper one, as the weight of testimony showed that Nixon was the aggressor in the affray, and that Mather was justified in shooting. People had remembered Tom Nixon shooting at Mysterious Dave while he was unarmed, and that helped free Mather. Tom Nixon had been an important citizen of Dodge City. The Kansas Cowboy described the funeral and how Nixon's death affected many in the community. Mr. Nixon was one of the oldest residents of Dodge City. In fact, he lived here before the town had an existence. He was a buffalo hunter and had at one time a large number of men under his employ. He was a genuine frontiersman with a somewhat rough exterior, but under his vest beat a warm and sympathetic heart. In all business relations, he was honest, prompt, and reliable. All the old settlers had a warm side for poor Tom. As a token of respect for the memory of the deceased, most of the business houses were closed on Tuesday afternoon, with crepe attached to the doors. The funeral services were held at the residence of the family and were conducted by Elder Collins. There was a large attendance of sympathizing friends. An invalid wife and several children survived the deceased. At the time of his death, he was assistant marshal of this city and had been serving as such since the last municipal election. Mysterious Dave would continue to stay in Dodge City, but would be involved in another gunfight and death in May of 1885 in the Junction Saloon. This time, Dave Mather felt he had overstayed his welcome in Dodge City and left before the court was able to try him. But that is a story for another time. In examining the feud between lawmen, Tom Nixon and Dave Mather, the two had more similarities that either would probably care to admit. Both of them liked to gamble. Tom Nixon with his horse races, and Dave Mather with his card playing in saloons. Both were tough men who were proficient in the use of firearms, although I believe Nixon to have been more skilled with a rifle, and Mysterious Dave more skilled with a pistol. If this fight had taken place on the plains with rifles, there would probably have been a much different outcome. Both were lawmen in tough towns, who enjoyed their positions in the community. Both were wrongly accused of robbing a train. Both wanted to be saloon and dance hall owners. The world of the American frontier fit both of them like a glove, although Tom Nixon had found his town and wanted to remain settled there, whereas Mysterious Dave wandered the West, staying only a few years in any single spot. Lastly, both wanted the other dead at any cost. Neither gave the other much of a chance to defend themselves. Tom Nixon had shot at Mysterious Dave in close quarters, with Dave having no weapon to defend himself. Dave Mather had come up to Nixon from behind, and as soon as he began to turn around, plugged him without Nixon fully realizing what was happening. 1884 was the beginning of the end of Dodge City's Wild West days, and at least some of the feud could be blamed on changing times. Not so long before this, Dodge City would have warmly welcomed another dance hall, and Mather and Nixon may just have been friendly rivals. But that time had passed, and the hallmarks of a wild frontier town, prostitution, dance halls, saloons, gambling, and drinking, were beginning to fade away.